Jen Psaki said the president will sign the American Rescue Bill from the White House Friday afternoon, which brings us to the House, which has approved President Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package moments ago. The overwhelmingly popular measure passed with the support of nearly every Democrat. The bill provides $1,400 direct checks to millions of low and middle income Americans. It includes a $300 a week unemployment bonus and an increase to the child tax credit. Billions of dollars will go to much needed issues such as vaccine distribution, state and local governments, and transit agencies, among other things. So let's bring in Ed O'Keefe and Grace Segers now. Ed is a CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Grace is a CBS News political reporter. Welcome to both of you. Ed, let me start with you. White House Press Secretary Psaki says the president will sign the bill Friday. The administration is very eager to get this wrapped up. What are the next steps once the president signs it?
He's got to go out and sell it, Tanya, and the plan is to get him out on the road, get the vice president out on the road, cabinet secretaries as well, Democrats generally, to talk about what exactly is in this bill, how communities across the country could stand to benefit from it. And at some point, we anticipate they will also give some sense of how they're going to track all the spending related to it. How is this $1.8 trillion going to be spent? Who specifically gets it? And is there any mechanism in place to ensure that it is spent properly, not wastefully? Obviously, the most immediate, most concerning part of this is the money that goes directly into the bank accounts of Americans. Those $1,400 stimulus payments goes down a little bit depending on how much you're making, and then everyone else gets cut off. There'll be child tax credits, of course, as well for millions of Americans. All of this designed to provide quick relief to millions who are looking for it. And as you said, overwhelming support for this nationally. And the White House likes to say it's bipartisan because there is a significant chunk of Republicans across the country who say they're for it. But the final vote count shows you just how tick-tock tight things are in the closely divided House of Representatives. 220 to 211 was the final vote. You need 218 votes to pass a bill. 2 members of the Democratic caucus are now no longer in office because they've taken jobs in the Biden administration. So that's essentially a 4-vote margin over what was needed. And it just shows you that, they were concerned at one point about possibly losing other Democrats. They only lost one, Jared Golden, Democrat of Maine in his second term, who had voted against the original House-passed version, voted against this one as well. His concern is that it isn't targeted enough. It's too big. No Republican member of the House or the Senate ultimately voted for the American Rescue Plan.
And Grace, as Ed mentioned, even though it doesn't have any Republican support, the polling is showing that this bill is immensely popular among the, American people. So more than 3/4 of Americans are supporting several of the key measures, including the direct checks, the child tax credits, and that money for schools. So how is that support from the public fueling Democrats' push for a strong and expensive plan to juice the economy during the pandemic?
I think that Democrats are really taking it as a license to move forward with this extremely ambitious, nearly $2 trillion plan, because even though no Republicans in the House or the Senate ended up voting for it, it is widely popular. It is pretty easy to sell, hey, we just gave you $1,400 in checks. Here's another unemployment bonus. Here's a child tax credit. So even though Republicans in Congress are arguing this is way too much money, this is unrelated to the coronavirus pandemic, the economy is already rebounding and we don't need this much money, Democrats are betting that their constituents are going to be grateful for what they do get and remember who it was who gave them these benefits. Of course, in this highly partisan era, it is unclear whether Republican voters who support the bill may then support Democrats.
Right. And Ed, is this likely to be the last COVID bill we will see President Biden push for? And what is going to be the next piece of his agenda?
The answer is probably no, and the answer to the second one is we don't know yet exactly. The next big part of the so-called Build Back Better plan that the president campaigned on and continues to keep as his focus is working now on recovery. If this large piece of legislation was the rescue plan, the next bit would be recovery and sort of rebuilding the country. And so in essence, that is likely to include a big conversation and an expensive one about infrastructure spending in this country. Rebuilding roads and bridges, airports, water systems, expanding internet access to corners of the country that don't have it as reliably as other parts of the country, and likely working in some kinds of proposals and spending plans regarding climate change, incentives for installing charging stations for electric vehicles, or making other mitigation changes to cities and states and to structures across the country to deal with natural disasters. A lot of cities, especially along the shoreline, the two coasts and down on the Gulf Coast, that worry about beach erosion, for example. Well, you could potentially find ways to fund those kinds of projects with this, and overall continue to create jobs and pump the economy with more money, more spending to help juice the economy as it comes out of the pandemic. So that is likely where we're headed. It is likely to be a far more complicated and prolonged conversation, and one that the White House and Capitol Hill both hope in some way can be bipartisan. You can get Democrats and Republicans together to talk about what exactly needs to be done, and perhaps more critically and more complicated, how it would be paid for. There have been some initial conversations about that, and that's likely to dominate a lot of the conversation since there's general agreement. Money needs to be spent, projects need to be approved and built, but how it's paid for is likely where a lot of this is going to get tripped up. And yes, the White House will cast it as another COVID-related piece of legislation because it's now trying to pry the country out of the economic hole it's been dug into over the last year or so.
Absolutely, but paying for it, like you said, the devil is in the details. Grace, does President Biden have unified Democratic support now for future big ticket bills, such as Ed just described, like an infrastructure bill? I mean, he was pretty much able to keep Democrats together for this one. Does it look like going forward he's going to continue to have that kind of unified support?
I think that ultimately the answer is yes, but it might be difficult for him, and he may have to work to convince Democrats who are on the fence. So when the Senate passed this big $1.9 trillion bill on Saturday, that came after, on Friday, Senator Joe Manchin, a moderate Democrat from West Virginia, decided that he wasn't going to support a certain Democratic amendment and would instead support a Republican amendment on the unemployment insurance benefit. That led to 12 hours of behind-the-scenes negotiations where Democratic leadership, including the president, were calling Manchin and trying to get him to switch his allegiance to this Democratic amendment. Now, eventually, he did agree to it and did support the Democratic amendment, which we saw provides $300 per week through September 6th in unemployment insurance. But Democrats had to make some concessions to him, and that is also the case with the $1,400 checks. Those came after some concessions to some moderate Democrats in the Senate about whether those checks would be limited. So I think, yes, ultimately, all Democrats voted for the bill in the Senate. All but one Democrat voted for the bill in the House. And I think that Biden will be able to keep his coalition together in the future. But these moderate Democrats, like Manchin, who have a deciding vote, are going to have a lot of power to get Congress and Biden to make concessions for them. So that's definitely something that we're going to want to watch as Congress moves forward with these other large bills.
Absolutely. And Ed, what can you tell us about the White House's plan to purchase 100 million more shots of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? When are those vaccine shots expected to actually be in circulation?
It's a good question, Tanya. We don't know the answer to that, but the president's expected to make that announcement official in the next hour when he meets with the CEOs of Johnson & Johnson and Merck. Of course, the two pharmaceuticals teamed up earlier this month with an agreement to produce Johnson & Johnson's single-dose vaccine. At this point, it's going to put the United States at a surplus of vaccine supply, at least when it comes to eligible adults. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, asked by our Nancy Cordes a little while ago about why would you be buying more than is necessary? Psaki said two things. One, in order to start building up supply potentially to vaccinate children. Second, in the event that you need extra to deal with variants of the virus that are making their way across the United States. You see various outbreaks, the California variant, the South African one, others that have propped up and that medical experts are concerned might not necessarily be stopped by the vaccine. So we'll learn more about this likely in a little bit and then in the coming days, but another significant purchase by the federal government of vaccine supply as the race to get to at least 100 million vaccinations by the first 100 days of the Biden presidency continues. Today is day 50, and they're on their way.
That's right. He passed his major piece of legislation halfway through the first 100 days on the dot. All right. Well, Ed O'Keefe and Grace Segers, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.